This program contains discussions about suicide and mental health that some listeners may find distressing. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is thinking about suicide, reach out for support. Call your local crisis line, connect with a mental health professional, or speak to someone you trust.
An original
from Story Studio Network.
I'm Tom Hoppe, and I'm your host of the Most Painful Podcast. On the last episode, we spoke to Dr. Ashwin Juneja, who discussed pharmacogenetics and how it can help people with ensuring they have the correct medication to help them with their medical condition. Lots of great information, and if you missed this episode, you can listen to it on our Spotify and Apple feed. And to receive notifications for the most up-to-date episodes, subscribe to the show. Today I'm joined by Jessi Beyer to talk about invisible pain in a visible world and navigating the intersection of chronic pain and mental health. Jessi is a crisis mental health clinician with 2 law enforcement agencies and 3 fire departments in Washington state, and a negotiator with a regional SWAT team. She holds a master's degree in clinical psychology and human services from Prescott College and in military psychology and terrorism from Adler University. Jessi, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, we met at the TEDx talk that you did in Surrey, and I really enjoyed your talk on, I guess, the polarization in the world that we live in today and how it's impacting mental health. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and maybe you can just start talking about that, because I think there's also, as we know, mental health and chronic pain are also connected together. So it'd be interesting to discuss that. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of take this in a couple different directions, and feel free to interrupt if you have questions or want to take it in a different angle. So starting with that chronic pain and mental health piece, this is something that research has shown consistently has a strong correlation. Most of the work that I do is related to trauma, crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and things like that. So more on that high acuity end of things. And one of the, I guess, risk factors and warning signs that I always look for when I'm working with a client in crisis is some sort of recent medical diagnosis. There's a lot of overlap between folks that have received a terminal medical diagnosis, folks that have received a medical diagnosis that is going to come with a lot of difficulties, whether that's side effects from treatment or chronic pain or something like that. That's one of those orange to red flags that goes off in my brain of, hey, this person could be at risk of depression, of suicidal ideation, of some of those other kind of things that are correlated with that. And so that in and of itself is interesting. But then when we look at that and we look at mental health broadly in the context of the world that we live in, the main point that I was making in my TEDx talk is that society is really working against us when it comes to a mental health perspective, social media, connectedness, but also loneliness at the same time. And what I mean by that is that in our world, we are living and functioning with very tribal brains. If we go back thousands of years in time, we humans, we couldn't live alone. We had to be part of a tribe. We couldn't build a shelter by ourselves or raise children by ourselves or hunt by ourselves. We had to live in community. And so that is how our brains are wired, is to live in community and to find groups of people that we can align with and really find safety in. Because if we think all the way back to those kind of tribal times, if we were outcast from our group, we died. And that's not an exaggeration. Like, we literally died. We physically could not function without the group. And so our brain still recognizes that social isolation and social rejection as a literal threat to life. So what do? We cling to our tribes. We say, I am part of this group. This group keeps me safe. I have an identity in this group, and I'm sticking there. And then when we look at what social media is, it is this constant feed of slightly polarizing topics. We get drawn down this route of indoctrination without necessarily recognizing that it's happening to us. But we're telling ourselves, this is our tribe. This is what I believe. This is my identity. This could be political. It could be religious. It could be a lifestyle choice like fitness groups or diet groups or things like that. But whatever that is, we start getting sucked a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more into it. And then one day we look up and we're standing on 2 separate islands from each other, unable and unwilling to communicate. So this society that we live in is already kind of working against us, like I said. But then you throw in that chronic pain element, which can be isolating, which can be difficult for folks to understand, which is obviously quite literally painful for you. And that can just exacerbate all these different effects. So it's this very interesting and troublesome whirlwind that we're living in right now.
And you've hit on a few things there. I mean, we've talked a lot about identity, be it non-military or military, people who have chronic pain or injuries or any illness, they struggle with, what's my new identity now? I used to do job X. Now what do I do? So now we're struggling with identity. And then I think, as you also hit on too, is people are isolated. What do they turn to now is social media. So, I mean, I think, well, I shouldn't assume, but I've heard many talks about how, social media try to draw a person in, but maybe you can kind of dive deeper into how that attraction to a certain platform ideology also impacts the brain and how it changes the brain.
Absolutely. There is some really, really fantastic research out there on how social media can affect the brain. I will say I'm not a neuroscience expert. There are people that know those effects way better than I do. But what I can really speak to is how that shows up in how we relate to each other, how we consume content, how we focus and have attention, and different things like that. So looking at a couple of these elements and maybe stepping back for a second, social media is a business. Yes, their business, their stated business, and that's in air quotes, is to connect us and to share ideas and to bring people that are geographically disparate closer together. But at the end of the day, it's a business and there are dollars behind it. Social media's entire goal, pick a platform. I don't care if it's TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or X, or whatever we're calling it now. Doesn't matter. Pick a platform. Their goal is to keep you engaged and online for as long as possible. The reason that they do that is that the longer you're online, the more ads you see, the more you purchase, the more advertisers spend on ads. And it's this ongoing cycle. So their entire goal might sound altruistic, but at the end of the day, they are trying to keep you on that platform as long as they possibly can. And so as we've transitioned as a society to shorter and shorter form content, two things are happening. One, from a neurological perspective, our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. The amount of people that can sit down and watch a 2-hour movie or listen to a 60-minute podcast without simultaneously pulling out their phone and scrolling Instagram or texting a friend or having some sort of side conversation is very low. Our ability to focus on one piece of content for a long time has gone down because our main form of social connectedness and social media doesn't require that long-term attention. The other thing that's happening is that as we spend more time on social media, as these clips and videos and text posts get shorter and shorter, right? We're not reading books anymore, we're reading tweets. The amount of content and the amount of nuance that we can consume has decreased simply because the character count has decreased. So instead of reading this long editorial thought piece on pick a topic, I don't care, on climate change, on immigration, on whatever topic you want to discuss, we're now getting 140 characters of text. And there's only so much nuance you can put into 140 characters of text. Additionally, because we're trying to stay on the platform as long as we can, or at least that's what social media is trying to get us to do, it rewards the polarizing content. It spreads that content further. So we're getting shorter content, shorter attention spans, less nuance and depth in that content. And the content that's being rewarded is the stuff that has the least nuance because nuance isn't catchy. Nuance is detailed. It requires thought. It requires intention. Whereas some sort of catchy headline where we just get one polarizing end of a perspective, that spreads like wildfire. So again, stay on the platform longer. What are we going to do? We're going to spread that wildfire as much as we possibly can.
Yeah, that's interesting because, just making notes here as you're talking. When you think of chronic pain, we know, or any illness where people are isolating, one of the best medicines is to get out and meet other people. But now what I'm hearing you say, if you're on a social media platform, and that has now become the new engagement, I guess. So people are less likely to engage with other people, or are they going to engage with people that are on their island, whatever their ideology is or whatever. So I could imagine what that's doing to mental health then too. They're already struggling with their illness, and now they're isolating themselves when actually they think they're not, I guess. Would that be correct in saying it that way?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people it can be that way. So it's not as much that social media doesn't connect us, it's that social media provides a false depth. It provides these sorts of parasocial relationships. So, for example, I might look at someone on social media that I'm a huge fan of, right? I love their work. I love, whether they're an actor or a thought leader or an author, whatever it is, I love their work. I'm a huge fan of them. I'm going to consume their content. And some part of my brain starts to think that I know them. and I have some sort of relationship with them. Maybe I leave some comments on their post. Maybe I send them a DM or two. Maybe they even DM me back. What that is doing is it is feeding this perception in my brain that I'm connected. I know this person. I'm part of their network. I know what their life is like. But in reality, I know what they put on a screen on the internet. I don't actually know them. And even more critically, when we think about isolation and mental health, they don't know me. It's a lot easier to have those relationships online because it doesn't require depth. It doesn't require vulnerability. It doesn't require putting on pants and getting into your car and going somewhere and spending time with actual humans. You just roll over and pick up your phone. You feel connected, but you're not connected. You're not getting that reciprocal depth that is required for true connection, the type of connection that actually has an impact on mental health outcomes and can rewrite potentially some of that identity loss from, getting diagnosed with a chronic illness or developing chronic pain. I don't want to say that social media is terrible because there are really wonderful corners of the internet where people can discuss and find community and find people that are similar to them, but it is not a one-for-one replacement with having actual human reciprocal in real life type of relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's where, as you're talking, I'm thinking if someone's already struggling with an illness and they're invisible, like you say, in this connected world, then where does that lead with mental health? In a bit, we'll talk about maybe some ways that if you have suggestions on what people can do to better manage this, so to speak. But how does that lead down the road of poor mental health and then unfortunately sometimes to suicide thoughts? Like can we make that connection between what you're talking about, this virtual isolation and the physical isolation?
Yeah. So Thomas Joyner is a suicidologist, and he has done a lot of research on kind of cause and effect related to suicide attempts, completed suicides, and different things like that. And one of the core tenets that he has discussed he's kind of has this 3-pillar model of the core contributing factors to suicide. And one of them is isolation. So loneliness, not feeling connected, not being part of a group. And research has shown over a variety of different populations using his model that is a consistent contributing factor to suicide. And as we've been talking about, social media can mask that loneliness, but underneath it's really feeding that loneliness because you are beholden to this app and the algorithm and the changes in the algorithm and whether someone reciprocates your DM across the internet, it's not actually this true human connection. And so I don't necessarily think it would be accurate to say, if you spend time on social media, you are directly increasing your suicide risk. It's much more complex than that, but it can lead to this isolation, this loneliness, which then can in turn compound with other life stressors, other things that are going on, and result in potentially a suicide attempt or other forms of, mental health struggles. I think what it really comes down to is, what is the life that you are choosing to live and how embodied is that life? My academic background is really trauma and crisis, like I said, but even more niche than that is integrative therapies for trauma. So looking at body-based therapies, movement-based, nature-based, and different things like that. And I see time and time again how we can kind of talk our way out of some problems, but then there's a part of that problem that lives in the body. For folks that are experiencing chronic illness, chronic pain, they feel that viscerally, right? They're living with that physically every day. And so the thought that this little screen can fix that for you when you're not forming those real human relationships, when you're not outside and moving your body to the best of your ability, whatever that is, given your health situation. When we don't have those kind of, maybe it sounds antiquated, but those like homegrown real life connections and experiences, and we're trying to live our life through this feed, where not only are we curating our experience to look good for other people, but we're consuming other people's curated experiences that they put out to look good for us. It just distorts everything. It distorts life. It distorts connection. It distorts reality. We even have on the, really extreme end, we're seeing a few cases of AI-induced psychosis. People have gotten so into the world of ChatGPT that they're unable to distinguish between reality and what is coming from that AI. We have people that have developed really intimate, deep relationships with AI, and when the algorithm for AI changes and they're no longer able to participate in those relationships, they're experiencing like legitimate clinical grief and abandonment from a bot that was never a human in the first place. So all of these things at different levels can contribute to this false sense of connection that might feel good in the moment, but isn't actually fueling your long-term health. And that, in combination with other life stressors, is when we start to see some of these serious negative mental health outcomes.
Yeah, it's interesting how the brain works to basically hijacked. You're being hijacked in a sense. The way I would interpret it is you're being hijacked into this virtual world and then moving into that. And I think that's why we see so much polarization and anger too, which probably if someone's online and they're going down a certain rabbit hole, there's probably anger that's going to come with that too, which what I liked what you said about your talk too is the cooperation and being able to discuss and share ideas and come to a common conclusion is a challenge when someone is really set in their way and they've planted their flag, so to speak. And now that person is struggling with illness on top of that. I could see the challenge that individual may have.
Yeah, yeah. And I want to add just a bit of clarification to that. It's not just that you're looking to see another's perspective and come to a common understanding. It's that you're willing to look across the divide at all. There are a lot of people that I have conversations with that I don't come to a common understanding with. Like I leave that conversation and I still think you're wrong and I'm right. But we were able to sit down and have that discussion. I was able to get curious about their perspective. They were able to get curious about mine. We might still disagree, but we had a legitimate, human, respectful conversation. Maybe we learned something about the other perspective. Maybe we didn't, but at least we weren't refusing to even engage and refusing to even look at another person's perspective and see how that could hold a sliver of truth, depending on, where we are and where they are and how that conversation goes. So to clarify, it's more about the intention and the respect than it is about necessarily finding a common ground and changing opinions.
I like that. That makes total sense because as you're saying that, I can see where people don't even want to have a discussion, which would then increase that isolation even more.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where if I go into a conversation trying to change your mind or trying to convince you that my side is accurate, that in and of itself is a barrier to that connection because I'm not going into this conversation saying, I'm going to try to understand Tom and his perspective and his life experiences that brought him to this belief set. I'm going in saying, I'm going to make Tom believe what I believe. That is a barrier. I don't have to agree with you at the end of the day, but I have to be willing to look at you and your experiences and be okay with that. And be okay with them being different than mine and walk away with at least a modicum of human decency and dignity at the end of that conversation.
No, and I think that makes sense because, if I'm going to go in to try to change your mind, then that's no different than planting my flag and not even talking to you. It's like, I learned this on social media and this is how it's going to be. And that's it. And if you don't agree with me, well, then we're not going to talk anymore and I'm going to walk away. And so, I like your idea of just being able to discuss. And I know we've done that, and you've done psychology on military as well. I mean, the work I'm involved in is a lot of identity and mindset from military and how it impacts not just chronic pain, but, any illness, because we know once you're depressed, that impacts other parts of the body. But the whole thing about nature and getting out in nature, and that's what we push in one of the programs that we have, the Alpine program, is to get people working as a community again, but to get them outside. Like you're saying, get them away from the phone in a sense and to get outside and to build those relationships. So when you say all this, what are some ideas, suggestions that in your experience you've seen work that could help people who, one, they're struggling, they're isolated, they may have pain, and they're like you said, social media does provide some very good information, but it can also be not good for us. So any ideas, suggestions to help people kind of balance that approach?
Yeah, I have a number of things that I tell people that I've used myself as well because I was a teenager and a college student and got sucked down that social media rabbit hole just like everyone else. So one of the things, I guess in no particular order, that I tell people is have discernment. So especially in this world of AI and AI-generated content, it is really difficult to know what is even real. Like what I'm looking at even truth, whether I agree with it or not? Is it based in reality or is it something that's fabricated by the internet? So being able to discern whether something is AI or not, being able to fact check what you're reading, is this coming from a peer-reviewed article or is this coming from someone's mom's basement? You need to be able to kind of figure that out. And so have that, not necessarily skeptical, although I probably have gone as far as skepticism in my current situation, but have that curiosity of, is this actually true? Whether I agree with it or not, like, is this grounded in reality when you're consuming content online? That would be my first thing. My second thing is that curate your feed to what is going to be helpful for you. The algorithm is really, really good, for better or worse, at giving you what you engage with. And so if you find a corner of the internet that is legitimately helpful for you, and not just masking helpful, but actually finding community in that part of the internet, engage with that and stop engaging with the other stuff, because then the algorithm will start feeding you more and more of the stuff that you're engaging with that you're finding helpful. The other thing that I'll share is that for a lot of folks, social media is a coping mechanism. Again, it's easier to scroll Instagram for a while than it is to get out of bed and do your physical therapy. It's easier to look at what other people are doing on Facebook than recognize that you just lost your entire identity because you were hit with an IED while doing military service and now you can't be in the military anymore. Like, whatever that is, social media can be that escape route. What most people tell other people, and where it falls short, is they'll just say, well, we'll just stop using social media. Like, don't feed that addiction type of thing. But the challenge with that is that doesn't remove the stressor that caused us to reach for that coping mechanism. So when you tell someone, don't use this unhealthy coping mechanism anymore, you also have to then provide an alternative. So it's, don't use this, replace it with this. Same thing if you're trying to get someone to quit smoking. It's not just stop smoking, because the underlying stress that caused the smoking is still there. It's stop smoking and instead do a push-up every time you want to smoke. I don't know, addiction is not my wheelhouse, so maybe that's a bad example. But you have to replace that coping mechanism with something else. And so what I ended up doing is every time I would recognize the pattern within myself that I would start feeling anxious or start feeling stressed or feel embarrassed, like I said something wrong in a social situation, I would reach for my phone. And every time I would notice that I would reach for my phone to open up Instagram and start scrolling and kind of numb out like that, I would put it down and do something else, right? I'd sing a song, I'd go on a walk, I would intentionally do something that was not picking up my phone. So I was intentionally replacing that coping mechanism with something that was healthier. It doesn't have to be a huge thing. I mean, it could be literally, instead of reaching for my phone, okay, I recognize that, I'm not going to put that there, and I'm going to snap my fingers 3 times. Like, something else embodied to get you away from that coping mechanism and replace that behavior with something else instead of just leaving a void there. Those would be some of my, I guess, best social media type tips. The other thing is just start small, right? Like, you don't need to do a life overhaul where you're spending 18 hours a day curled up in bed scrolling Instagram, and then tomorrow you're spending 7 hours hiking up a mountain and blah, 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 blah. Like, start with these small changes, because that's what's going to end up being sustainable over the long term than trying to overhaul everything at once.
Yeah, a couple things there I would pick up. When you say masking, what do you mean by that?
So masking, I mean, instead of sitting with the discomfort of your life, whatever that discomfort is, chronic pain, terminal illness, relationship distress, job dissatisfaction, whatever you're trying to avoid, masking is getting a quick dopamine hit from scrolling social media instead. So it's not fun to be unhappy. Like, that might sound really, really dumb and basic, but it is not fun to sit in that reality of, I don't like my life. I don't know who I am. I don't know where I'm going. And even if I did know where I'm going, I don't know if I could get there. So instead, I'm going to scroll and look at happy puppy videos on Facebook, and it's going to make me feel a little bit better right now instead of dealing with the reality of what my life is. Now, don't get me wrong. I scroll Instagram a lot still. Like, I doom scroll, and I just need to turn my brain off for a little bit because I've been going all day and I need a break. And that's fine. But where it starts to become a problem is when that is your only coping mechanism and you're using it as a way to avoid actual things in your life that could require attention in order to improve.
Yeah, and as we, one of the things we know with veterans is they have these deep-rooted unknown behaviors that come through military service that they're not even aware of, right? So providing that awareness to them, and then being able to, like you said, replace it with something different through coaching or whatever. And I guess that would be kind of the same with social media. It's so deep-rooted, it's just become normal, but it also impacts everything else. If we're suffering with an illness or chronic pain or having depression or whatever it is, it's really not helping us in some sense if it's the only thing we turn to, is from what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. And I even, how old am I? 15 years ago, I'd be out with my friends in school and would be sitting at a restaurant, 10 of us around the table, a sports team or whatever it was. And I'd be looking around the table and every single person is on their phone. every single person is looking at social media or playing a game or even texting each other from across the table. And I go to work now and I sit down and I look at my colleagues and we're all hanging out around the table in between calls and everyone is on their phones, scrolling Instagram, scrolling Facebook, scrolling TikTok, whatever it is. We are in a room with immediate access to real live human connection. And instead we're holding up our phones in front of our faces and doing that instead. That's what I'm talking about, right? I'm not saying social media is terrible and we need to get rid of it, and there could be a case to be made for that, but that's not necessarily where I'm at. What I'm saying is that we're using it as a replacement for human connection. And that is where I have the problem, is when we are literally in the same room as each other, unable to engage with each other because our phones are more interesting. That is wildly problematic to me.
Yeah, and it increases everything you've been talking about: depression, loneliness, the whole 9 yards. So it's it's an interesting time. So I really enjoyed the discussion today, and I enjoyed your talk as well. It obviously gives a lot of room for people to think and to move forward, and hopefully we can build that connection, because it is, as like I said, as we found with our program, once we get people together, it changes things. Now the longevity when they go home, well, that's unknown, but at least they got some kind of awareness, and hopefully it'll carry on.
Yeah. And I'll add to that as well. It really is a matter of what environment are they going home to. So for example, in a lot of the work that I do, if I'm able to get someone a bed in an inpatient facility, they are there for a couple weeks, a couple months. They come out, they're feeling better. They have their meds sorted out. They've gone through a lot of therapy, like things are looking good. And then they go back home into that same broken environment that traumatized them enough in the first place to send them to inpatient. And that's when we get these cycles of just treatment, feel better, back out into the real world, feel worse, back into treatment over and over and over again. And it's a similar cycle that I'm hearing with your people, if they find this microcosm of connection and humanity and resilience, and then they go back into an environment where they're inundated with reels and political extremism and social media and all these other things. So you are providing an incredible service. And the broader question is also, how do we extend that to actually create lasting change and not just put people back in that same environment that hurt them in the first place?
Well, and I think that's why we're going to have somebody, you probably know, Dr. Kim Foster, come on and talk about some behavioral changes. So it's a nice follow-up, because I think both of you provide excellent perspective. So it was great to have you on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
And for feedback about the show or more information on chronic pain, you can visit our website, veteranschronicpain.ca, or follow us on Facebook and X at Chronic Pain COE, and on Instagram at chronicpain_COE. Jessi, once again, thanks for being on the show. Love talking to you. And for our audience, stay safe and keep the hope alive.
The Most Painful Podcast is produced for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence by Story Studio Network.